Good afternoon, welcome back. Hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Now for our next session, latest developments and the future of safeguarding. This panel session is just over an hour, and once again there will be a chance for you to ask your questions, and please keep tweeting, please keep using social media. I'm glad to see that many of you have posted some lovely comments on our social media feed. Thank you very much indeed. So would you please welcome our panelists. First up, would you please give a very warm welcome to Michelle North. Also delighted that he's here to join us today to tell his story and also share some experiences and opinions. Paul Stewart. Right. Also, no doubt there will be many questions to our panellists, including to Tara Dillon. Please give Tara a very warm welcome. Walk on music.
Why did I sign up for this? I could have sat my goal myself.
Also delighted that John Donnelly, CPE, is with us. Please give John a very warm welcome. There you go, sir. It's like the Graham Norton show, this, isn't it? Next, we have Savita Sohal. And finally, my special guest tonight, Jayne Molyneux, ladies and gentlemen. Very good. There you go. Good afternoon to you. Welcome, one and all. Really good to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us on this very, very important subject. Tara, first of all, can I start with you? Let's set the scene. We're talking about from grassroots to elite level this afternoon, correct?
Yeah. The work that we're, probably what a lot of people want to hear is the work that Sport England and UK Sport have recently commissioned CIMSPA to undertake, which is to look at workforce registration. And that is, of course, from grassroots to elite, from paid to volunteers. So it's a huge scope, and I'll happily talk a bit more about that as the session continues, Jason. But the key to this is, in my 30-odd year career in this sector, I'm pleased to say that I've never felt the sector more aligned to, as much as anything else, not challenge how we do things, but to be a little bit more vocal and a little bit more out there about just how good we are. And workforce registration really should be viewed as a vehicle to showcase the brilliance of our sector and to support, promote and protect coaches, as opposed to some of the rumours that I've heard over the years, which is workforce registration or a national register will be a place where coaches are banned. I think we need to be quite realistic about it. Coaches who are unable to meet the brilliant and high standards that this sector upholds don't have a place anywhere in our sector. But by and large, a huge majority of the people who work in our sector are utterly brilliant, and I see workforce registration as a real positive to support and promote that.
Okay, thank you. Jayne, do you share that sentiment? Do you agree?
No, absolutely. And I've reflected on, obviously, the sessions this morning around everybody working together, as Tara said. Because if you think about individuals who take part in sport, they all start somewhere. So if you talk about grassroots, they'll start as an individual, whether it's their parents or as a child. You know, those that are fortunate to go on and take part in elite sport, obviously then move into, the elite pathway, but they're still an individual as well. So, and it's following them collectively on that journey about making sure that, how we're working together on, for example, as Tara said about workforce education, that we're celebrating good coaches, working together with UK sports councils to make sure we're as robust as possible, that we're safeguarding that individual when they take part in sport. So it's really important. We're talking about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And Savita, as a case manager, how concerned should we be, or are we in a position where we can celebrate some amazing work going on right now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with regard to the work we do at Sport Resolutions, we've launched the Safeguarding Case Management Programme, of course funded by our colleagues at Sport England and so forth. And what that really allows is end-to-end safeguarding case management of cases, because of course for much of the smaller sports where there might be one LSO, a lead safeguarding officer, wearing many different hats, having something land on your desk and not really knowing what to do, they can come to us and we can offer, not via us, but of course our esteemed colleagues on the panel, many of whom are here today in this hall, they can offer the advice and guidance to them, be that from any level of the services that we provide. So that's initial advice and investigations and right through to panels as well, first instance and appeal panels. So it really is end-to-end in that regard.
Okay. And John, I just want to come to you, before we get Paul's story, come to you in terms of responsibility, right? So, responsibility on sport or responsibility on the sport?
Well, in terms of coaching?
In terms of coaching, in terms of safeguarding?
Well, I mean, every NGB is responsible for upholding the conduct of its sport, and that's the system that we set up in this country, and that's quite right. So ultimately, sports are accountable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're responsible for delivering all of it. And I think particularly in UK sport, we're there to provide support to allow sports to both encourage and their coaching to uphold the highest standards, because behind every successful athlete is a dedicated and hard-working coach. And when coaches, sometimes coaches get it wrong, there are processes in place to deal with that and to put the wheels back on and move forward.
Yeah. Okay. Paul, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Very nice to see you. We had a little chat earlier on, Paul and I, about Spurs' failure to do anything this season. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that.
No.
Before I go back around the panel, Paul, for those people who don't know your story, just remind us what happened to you.
Yeah, well, basically, as a youngster, I had a dream, and my dream was to be a professional footballer. Unfortunately, that dream was scarred by a coach that promised to deliver everything, but really his intent was to physically and sexually abuse me. So I endured both physical and sexual abuse over a 4-year sustained period, threats to kill my parents and brothers, and I didn't feel that I had anywhere to turn, because back then, when we're talking in the mid-70s, there was no such thing as grooming, there was no such thing as duty of care. So, these people were very manipulative individuals, and they were able to, what we know is grooming, is groom. And that's what they had to do then. They had to groom the whole family. It wasn't like it is today, where the dangers lie with social media. They had to go around the whole family to isolate you, then to perpetrate the abuse. And I didn't feel that I had anywhere to turn, Jason, but I still had that desire to be a footballer, and I genuinely believed that when I was told that he would kill my parents, that he would do so, and that when he said, this is what you've got to do in terms of the sexual abuse if you want to be a footballer, I believed that because of that dream. And, I don't sit alone here. It happened to a lot of us back in the early 70s, 80s, even up to the 90s. But I have to say, sat here today, and the work that I do within sport, and we don't often do it. I think, and there's people sat here far more versed on safeguarding than I am. And I've worked with some of them extensively, and I see the work that's been done within sport now. And I think we should champion that more than, I know today's about looking into the future and what we can do, but I take my hat off, because I came into this field in 2016 when I came forward with my story. I didn't really know what I was letting myself in for. I did go away and study because I wanted to see the landscape of safeguarding, but I work extensively with EFL clubs, and I see what the EFL have done within these clubs for the youngsters, and it's heartwarming, I'll be honest with you. There is a but, there's always a but, because we're never there, and there are more that we can do. But only last week, and I'm as proud as I guess as the EFL are. They got an excellent standard from Ofsted in the work that they've done within academies and within sport, and particularly part of that was safeguarding. So, whilst I do often deliver my story, Jason, I think what's more important is what we're actually doing and how far we've come with safeguarding. And I take me hat off not just to football, but to all sports for what they've done. And even being in, I mean, this is my second time with Sports Resolution, and to see the work that they're actually putting into to safeguarding is, from somebody that's been through what I've been through, it's really great to see.
Yeah, true. But at that point when you decided to come forward and tell your story, that's a remarkably courageous thing to do. Remarkably courageous, and has an impact on, will have an impact on so many people in terms of people who are going through perhaps what you went through, but also in terms of members of the panel here improving the situation for many people. When you decided to come forward and tell your story, how long, what was that process like in terms of, am I prepared for this? Am I prepared for what might happen?
I don't think you're ever prepared for that. I thought that I thought it through. You know, when I decided to come forward, I took the weekend to tell my own family, my parents, which, as you can imagine, I wouldn't want any child, you know, to have to turn up to their parents' house and tell them that the coach that they'd actually invited into our home and who actually lived with them had abused their son or daughter for a sustained period, because you can imagine the guilt. But I was at a stage where I'd been through so much, and it's well documented with the drugs and the drink and the problems on and off the field, that I felt that I needed to do something for myself, because all I was doing was heaping self-destruction on myself, but also on those loved ones around me. They were suffering from my actions, and they hadn't done anything. And even though I thought it through and spoke to those close and the loved ones, it was still a massive roller coaster early on. I didn't know where I wanted to be. Do you know, you get pulled from pillar to post because people want you to recount your story. Was I ready to recount the story day in, day out? I'm not so sure. But I eventually found a place where I think my voice and a survivor's voice has really impacted on the sport itself. And if I go back to 2016 again, would I have thought about coming forward? Yes, I probably would have done. But fast forward to 2023 and the work that I see being done, I would do it every day and twice on Sunday.
Yeah, well, it's amazingly brave. Michelle, I mean, such a courageous thing to do, to step forward, put your hand up, say, this happened to me, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else.
Absolutely, and I think the key point is that Paul did it and it enabled other people to come forward, but that was an adult. And when we talk about safeguarding, we often talk about young people speaking out, and we're asking them to be really brave and do things that they're not ready to do. So I think it's our responsibility as sports organisations, people like myself at the Child Protection in Sport unit, to really try and make the adults around to be really aware of what's happening, talk to young people, notice behaviour change. We shouldn't be putting the responsibility on those young people to speak out when things aren't right. That's too much responsibility as an adult, let alone as a child. But yeah, incredibly brave, and it helped people come forward because they saw the response, they saw the fact that Paul and his colleagues were taken seriously, and that's really important for people who have lived with abuse to be able to see that and give them the courage to come forward.
I said at the start, we're going to do grassroots to elite level, you know, the whole thing really. Do you worry about grassroots, Michelle?
What Paul said about where people are, you know, who pose a risk to children, they go where children are. So they're in all walks of life, not just sport, but education and faith groups, as we've seen in the press. So yeah, I worry about grassroots, but in the same way as anywhere that young people are. I think it's really key, like Savita talked about, the importance of case management, and that's a really important part of safeguarding, but so are all the other parts like policies and procedures and safer recruitment and training and workforce and how you talk about safeguarding, because it goes back to that word around culture and how open we are to talk about how well are we doing things, is this working for everyone, how does my coaching practice make you feel, you know, giving those opportunities for people to speak out is incredibly important. Yeah. And that's at all levels.
I chaired a radio debate, Tara, about 2 years ago, and safeguarding came up, and we were discussing grassroots, and we were talking about coaches. And some chap rang in and said, the danger you might have is that you might put off coaches. And if coaches don't step forward, you know, the mums and dads, the grannies and granddads who are putting the cones out and putting the goals up for football or rugby, athletics, cricket, whatever it might be, suddenly our kids don't get an opportunity to play the sports that we love. Did he have a point?
Very good point. Absolutely. And, you know, any practice that we put into place, going back to registration, for example, needs to be proportionate. And I think as a collective we can work through right touch regulation. I don't think any policy or practice needs to become onerous. But equally, if you're undertaking a function or you're accountable or you have the same level of duties and responsibility as that of a paid coach, people will have to meet the same criteria. I mean, somebody gave me an example a few years ago, somebody from within a sport around gas engineers. You know, we're all kind of familiar with the Corgi badge, or I think it's called Gas Safe Certificate now. And somebody said to me, if I called and paid for a gas engineer to come and service my boiler, my expectation is that they are qualified, competent and safe to do so. If I met a bloke down the pub or a woman down the pub and said, my boiler's broken, and they volunteered because they are Corgi registered to come and fix your boiler, your expectation is the same. But it needs to be proportionate. So we don't want to put the 3 million fantastic volunteers who work in our sector, or volunteer in our sector rather, off doing what they do, but it needs to be proportionate. If I'm just helping out on the Saturday morning and I'm putting the cones out and helping out with the drinks, etc., and I'm under supervision, there's all sorts of things we need to work out, but none of it is insurmountable. But equally, Jason, it can't be ignored either. Volunteers are not exempt. And volunteers don't necessarily not offend. They're well-intended, lovely people, but, you know, I'm sure Paul thought about his coach once upon a time. So we have to be honest about how we tackle this. But as I said, using a proportionate and right touch.
Yeah, let's go around the panel. What do you think, John?
Sport's about the stuff of dreams, and I think inevitably people are often perhaps prepared to tolerate more excesses, and you've got to balance that against, you know, the huge volunteer cohort. And we have volunteer coaches even in the high performance system, so we're not immune from that. How do you put in place processes and policies and safeguards to make sure you've got the right people doing the right things for the right reason? And just like the guy that burgles your house doesn't wear a black and white striped jumper, these people that turn up with poor intent, they don't come with a big badge. So how do you root that out without cheesing off the rest of the hard-working people that do a great job supporting athletes from the very top right down to community sport? Yeah,
what you do, Savita, you call it out, don't you? If you spot it, you have to act on it. And then, but one wonders, you know, at the elite level, perhaps people know where to go. When it's a grassroots athletics, football, rugby, cricket, whatever it might be, do they know? Do they have any understanding on what they do and how they report that?
I'd like to think that actually the landscape of safeguarding has changed so much from when I first started at the Lawn Tennis Association right through to football, that actually people do know. And actually I think there is loads of really, really good work that does go on, that does raise the awareness of what could happen if it goes wrong, and that's usually in the press, and we see that. And we see actually the need, therefore, then to have proper processes in place and have the right credentials and have the processes to make sure people are qualified, to make sure that they're trained adequately. And it's going back to what Michelle said, safeguarding doesn't work in just one silo. We're not talking just about accreditation, we're talking about the education piece, the training, practical examples, and you know, all of that sort of sits together. So making sure that all of it fits together in that regard, it is really important. And I agree with what Tara said. It's about not making it necessarily onerous. But for example, I'm chair of governors at my primary school, and you know, it's really about building that culture of it could happen here, so how are we going to remedy it? What are we going to do to try and make sure that it doesn't happen here? We've got policies, we've got procedures, we've got training, we have an open door policy. If you don't know there's a practice you haven't come across before or you're a bit unsure, come and ask and we'll get the answers for you. So I suppose it's all of that.
Yeah, it's all that. So Savita's right, it's the whole package, isn't it, Jayne?
Yeah, absolutely. And reflecting on what the panel's just said, there's lots more that we can do. I mean, people often say, safeguarding is one of those, it's not a nice subject, it's taboo, we shouldn't be talking about it. And I think we need to talk more openly about, why we are safeguarding people who are taking part in sport, not just participants or coaches. And it's not because, we're trying to, be awful and stop people volunteering. It's that we do it because we want people to really enjoy taking part in sport. We all know, how enjoyable it is in sport, the good feeling we get from it. So it's just maybe explaining to parents to say, this is why we have the safeguarding processes in place, because we want to make sure that the environment is safe. Tara used the analogy of the Baxi boiler. The other analogy I use is that, if you're a parent, you wouldn't walk into the middle of a field and just, throw your car keys off and leave them, but you'd quite happy just turn up with your child, drop them off in a field and disappear off them and not know anything about the coach. So if you want your child to have a great experience and to really enjoy it, ask the questions, and if an organisation really embraces the importance of safeguarding, they will have no issue to talk to them about, this is what we do. If somebody's not happy, this is what they need to go to. So it's all around education and people being happy to talk about why safeguarding is really important. We want people to enjoy, continue to take part in sport. We need volunteers, and it's just about supporting and protecting everybody.
Yeah. Paul, do you think now the systems are in place that, God willing, nobody would be going through what you went through?
Yes, most definitely. And we have to remember that 99.9% of the people that are working within sport are doing it for the right reasons. What I would say is, with the organisations, and certainly from the grassroots side of it, it's okay having policies and procedures in place, but you need to make sure that that's visible in your organisation. So I always say, give it legs and let it walk around the organisation, so that people that want to abuse that, and that's abuse in any way, not just what I went through, but whether it's shouting from the touchline or whatever, bullying, that they see that it's not tolerated within the organisation. What they will do is they'll walk to that organisation, see that they can't get away with perpetrating abuse of any kind, and they'll look for an organisation that doesn't have everything and visibly everything in place. So, and we need to relax on, because people are frightened when you talk about safeguarding. Or they think, and that's right up to the elite level, they think that we're just going to put rules, procedures in place that are going to just stop them doing the job, when in fact we're helping them do the job, because they're at risk as well. Yeah. They are, coaches are at risk if they don't follow the guidelines that are put in place.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up, you talked about your abuse, but you go on social media, on Twitter, for example, on a Saturday afternoon, and sometimes a mum or dad will post a story about some young kid. Football's my sport, so I'll use football. Some young kid who hasn't been picked for the last 8 games and has sat on the touchline for 8 games because the dad thinks he's Pep Guardiola. Do you know what I mean? And he's playing the Champions League semi-final. And that gets called out. But sometimes they're allowed to carry on coaching. And there's got to be a system in place where you say, that is unacceptable. There are 4,000 retweets. 5 million people have responded to this saying this is wrong. There's got to be a system in place to say, listen, coach, thanks very much indeed for your time, but now it's time for you to move. Would you agree, Michelle?
Completely agree with that. And I think I agree with what everyone said about being scared. And I think what we need to get better at is promoting that good behaviour. What does good look like? We say it like it's a given that everyone knows. And maybe that coach doesn't recognise that what they're doing is having an impact and is negative. And, maybe they do and they should be got rid of. But we've got to be much clearer around how we say positive things. What are the behaviours we want to see, whether it's coaches, sideline behaviour, whatever it might be, rather than just concentrate on the negative. Because I think that's where people get scared, because they're so scared of getting it wrong inaction happens, and that's the last thing we want.
Yeah. Feel free, by the way, to come in at any point. Don't wait for me, John. You want
I
to
think this comes back to, sports are responsible for upholding the conduct in their sport. They're responsible for defining and articulating a set of values that encompass the ethos, and safeguarding is as much an attitude as mind as anything else. And exactly Paul's point, it's got to be across everything. And then they have the responsibility to, use a nasty word, police those values. And where people don't live up to them, I agree, they need to be shown the door. And you're better off having a gap in your coaching rank than having the wrong sort of coach, because they perpetrate poor behaviour, and people will see them and they go, okay, that's the way to get on, and that spreads. So it's really important that sports set out what good looks like, and then make sure that people live by it.
And does that fall upon the responsibility of the club, the National Association, for example, the governing body, or what?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's top to bottom. It's responsibility of clubs, regional associations, the national governing body, and even within UK sport, we play a role too, because where people don't uphold the respective code of conduct and are seen to breach that, we will review their eligibility to have public funding and use public funding facilities, and where they're in breach of that, they will lose that privilege.
Yeah. Tara?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, actually, Jason, is that national governing bodies have been, criticised rather a lot recently for stuff that happens at grassroots level. And the reality is that we don't know where all of our coaches are. So that can be systemised. I think that's what registration might do. And that will enable NGBs to pass on the brilliant stuff that they do, which currently they're criticised for not doing. The reality is they're not reaching. And that's just a culture thing that can be shifted fairly quickly. So all the brilliant work that's out there that Paul's mentioned, that we know has moved on eons over the last couple of decades, will reach the right people. The other thing, just going to Savita's point, is that 52% of the coaches that we do know exist aren't suitably trained to do the job. And again, that's not insurmountable. We're not asking coaches to spend small fortunes on monolithic qualifications that aren't portable. We're in 2023. Accessing learning is fairly straightforward now, and we could be pretty robust as a sector as to what is a minimum requirement to undertake a given occupation, whether you're a performance director or you are that parent at the weekend. So, and I've spoken to many sports, and they're full of great ideas. So, I think some people have feared in the past that this is so big that, and it doesn't happen on my watch. It happens on all of our watches. I think we've just got to be slightly more realistic about the challenges aren't always about poor practice. I think there's masses of great practice. It's who we're reaching and how we're reaching. We'll fix this across the piece.
That's kind of the question I put to John at the beginning about the sport or sport responsibility.
Yeah, well, sport as a sector has a collective responsibility to never stand still on this. But each sport has a responsibility for its workforce.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where that workforce is, then we can enable that.
Jayne, please.
I mean, and so responding to, celebrating good coaching, one of the things that we're working with the likes of UK Sport, the Child Protection Sport Union involved, Street Games, one of the, children's charities, the Youth Sport Trust, is a coaching children's collaborative where sport is working together to celebrate what is good about coaching children. And a lot of it's being built on the UN rights of the child. So it's giving giving children a voice as coaching. So we're working on a collaborative about that, and shortly we'll be launching it with lots of resources about celebrating good coaching and giving coaches with lots of tools and resources about, listening to children, making coach fun and enjoyable. And then as Tara's talked about, is looking at the professional workforce standards as well for coaching as well. So, it's not about having lots of isolated pieces of work. It's about everything coming together to recognise about how can we improve and celebrate quality coaching.
There are many Coach of the Year awards, though, aren't there, at the end
Absolutely.
of the year? There are quite a lot of them, aren't they, in the regions especially?
Yeah, but obviously this is going right down to the basics.
Yeah.
So, you know, for the examples that you've just talked around, as in the social media, as in, you know, the coaches about trying to, you know, think about, you know, the rights of the child. They have a right to be heard. How do we make it fun and enjoyable? And there are some coaches that just go, I just need some help. You know, how do I help? So, you know, how do we help them with tools and resources? Yes, of course, we celebrate, you know, good coaching around awards. We want everybody to celebrate good coaching and make sure that they're supported to able to do that. So
We're going to spin around the panel with one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. So if we can get the mics on standby, again, same procedure as we had earlier. Shout out your name, your organisation, representation, and then fire out a question. We've still got another 45 minutes or so. One question I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to start with you, if I may, John, in terms of Paul's story. And I'm not just saying this because I'm in the media, but there is a tendency when journalists and presenters sit on panels like this to talk about the media, but in the context of what we're talking about, it is massively important. How important Paul's story being told online, radio, television, and in the press?
Hugely important, because it gives voice to the issue and exposes it to a greater number of people, which impacts on so many areas. You know, people coming forward, people being more vigilant, people perhaps reflecting on that and changing how they interact with people that they coach or athletes with it. So yeah, it's. I mean, it has to be done sensitively because obviously there's a person at the middle of all this, but I think careful media engagement is really powerful.
Did you find that difficult, Paul, when obviously, because your phone probably went into meltdown, I guess, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah, I mean, I was
Going from TV studio to radio
I was,
studio?
yeah. I mean, he was pulled from pillar to post, but I didn't really. I was on an emotional roller coaster.
Was it a bit like a whirlwind?
I hadn't said anything for 42 years, and then all of a sudden you're getting pulled, and I wasn't ready for it. And with hindsight, and in hindsight, I may have thought differently, but as I say, I'm going forward with what has happened since with all the guys and people that came forward. I just wanted to say something because we've got a lot of NGBs here as well, Jason. And what I see is how difficult it can be for parents when we talk about safeguarding. As a parent, you can have a child playing cricket, you can have a child playing rugby, you can have a daughter dancing or whatever. And when I look in just football itself, and we look at the Premiership, the FA, the EFL, there's 3 standards of safeguarding there. And as a parent, when you're looking across sports, I just think we need to simplify it, right? When we look at health and safety in an organisation, there's a certificate on the wall that says this is health and safety, and it's the same across the board. I would just like to see governing bodies probably getting together, making it simpler we're talking the grassroots and the parents that are going to just simpler for parents so they can understand it. And then they may not be as frightened about safeguarding, and coaches as well may not be as frightened about safeguarding, but we seem to have so many different safeguarding standards when ultimately they all came from the same place originally, which was the CPSU many years ago, and we've just added and changed.
So are you saying like one uniform standard?
I'd love to see it, yeah, because 80% of safeguarding is safeguarding. 80% of safeguarding is exactly the same. You're going to have 20% which differs on where you actually go training or whatever you do, but when you look at 80% of it, it's virtually the same. So I'd like it to be a little more standardised, certainly for parents that have a number of children doing different sports, because they must be confused.
Yeah, what do we think? There's lots of agreement on the panel. Yeah? Everyone's in agreement. Fantastic. Right then, let's open it to the floor then. Right, first question. I saw a hand go up at the back. There it is. Thank you. Our sound team are bringing the microphone to you now. Thank you very much. As I say, if you can just tell us the name of your organisation and fire your question. If you want to put it to a member on the panel, even better. Thank you.
It's a general question, comment. I'm not sure if it comes out of my mouth for a moment. Karen Roberts from British Judo. It's that last bit there, Paul, that really made me think 80% could be similar across NGBs, but actually 80% could be similar across a lot of sectors. And so I wondered what's the campaign beyond sport? Because as a parent, I'm fortunate I've had a journey through sport. I know some of those questions to ask. A lot of the parents I meet at the playground couldn't think of any of those questions to ask. So what's the campaign beyond sport, working with education, working with the health sector, but also social services? How can we raise that awareness of everybody? Because as an NGB, it is difficult to be the only voice working within our sport. And if parents were armed with questions, it would be fantastic. If sports centres and local providers were armed with questions, it would be fantastic. Not just for when they're in a judo club or a football club, but also when they're in school or in a hospital or in other social situations. So what's the campaign to unite beyond sport?
Okay, so a campaign. Who wants to start off?
Should I come in with that
Yeah,
one? Because I can
please.
only speak about sport. So
Yeah.
for those of you that don't know, the CPSU is part of the NSPCC. And up for about the last, I think we're in year 9, we had Parents in Sport Week. Last year it changed its name to Keeping Your Child Safe in Sport. And what we're trying to do is educate parents around, you know, what to look for in a good club, how do you report a concern, how do you act on the sidelines, different messages. And we've found exactly that same problem, that we need a different avenue to speak to parents because it needs to come from different channels. You know, people were talking about marginal gains the other day, and if it came from sport and it came from education and it came from health, that message comes across a lot clearer around what good looks like in all sectors. So if you have any tips on how we can get that campaign wider, I am absolutely all ears, but I would love to see something joined up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so certainly the Department for Education, I think, have started to recognise this. So, you know, they have started to pull together a group that's cross-sector. Obviously, you know, sport is represented, but there's also, you know, there's the uniform services a part of it. There's obviously different faith groups that run out-of-school hours, recognising that, you know, this is about out-of-school hours, duty of care around safeguarding. So there are some discussions about how do you work collaboratively, collectively, cross-sector. And you say campaign's not been discussed, but absolutely, I see that's a really sensible way forward about raising, you know, safeguarding for children, young people, and even adults. It doesn't matter what setting you're in. As Paul said, there are some very basic principles that people need to be aware. So certainly, I do know that the Department for Education are starting to recognise that, and what they're able to do is to pull other sectors together, you know, that have a sort of a common understanding, a common desire to work together around safeguarding.
Yep, okay.
I think it is, as Michelle said, and we have spoken about this in the past, it's getting to the parents, Jason. That, for me, would be the golden chalice. You know, if I was to stand and tell my story to a parent, they wouldn't turn up at their organisation, open the car door and let the child run out. They'd think twice. And I don't know how, and you've done some great campaigns, and I've worked with you on some campaigns, but parents still think it's not going to happen at their organisation where their child, you know, they'll see it on the news, and they don't think that it's going to happen there, which really raises red flags. If you're an organisation where you're that blasé about it, then there are risks at that organisation. So for me in particular, with all the work that I do, if I could get in front of more parents, that would be the golden chalice. Because
And what would those campaigns look like for you then, Paul? Would they be
Well,
series of national press adverts or?
Yeah, it can be anything, but I mean, particularly in sports clubs, as where I work, it'd be nice induction that you could have, you know, without the children there, somebody, you know, recounting the story as I've done many times, which might be a shock factor, but I don't really care as long as then they realise that, you know, because you're talking about the most precious possession you've got, and you'll just open the car door and as young as 6 and let them run off and go into somebody's hands that you don't know, that you've never checked up on, and it's bewildering, and that's despite all the scandals that have broke, because it wasn't just football. I mean, it's touched a lot of sports, as we well know, and worldwide. So, yeah, it's still, for me, not hitting home with parents. I have my own grandchild, and, you know, my daughter's sick of me when she's taking her dancing. Oh, listen, Dad going on about safeguarding again, and that's my own daughter.
Yeah.
You know, because parents are afraid to ask the questions. They feel that they're challenging organisations when they say, have you got a safeguarding policy? If I've got a concern, who do I report that concern to? You know, basic questions. They're a bit reticent in really going and asking them questions, because I think the organisations sometimes think they're being challenged, and the parent thinks that they're asking questions that is challenging the organisation, almost criticising them as though they haven't. And we should make it as basic questions that we ask when we're letting our child go into an organisation, at least.
Yeah, quite right. Karen, thank you for your question. Any other questions? There's two at the front here and one at the back. So we'll get one mic at the back, so you're ready to go, and then we'll get another mic down the front so we can get 3 questions away. Let's start at the back. Have you got your mic?
I have.
Yes, hello. How are you?
Good afternoon, Brendan Dargis.
Good afternoon.
Jayne Watkins here from National Safeguarding Panel and also England Wales Cricket Board. In previous roles in time law, I was deployed abroad. And I think sometimes we've been ourselves up in terms of safeguarding and not recognising that we're pretty good at what we do. Whilst deployed in that country, I introduced myself as a designated safeguarding lead to a chief executive of a sports organisation. And he asked me what safeguarding was. Which is fascinating, isn't it, that we look at what we have here, what we've managed to put in place. And I think sometimes we beat ourselves up that we're not very good, but we actually are. But recognise that we have work to do. So the question I have for the panel is, what does safeguarding look like within sport across the United Kingdom in 10 years' time? Thinking from a child and adult safeguarding perspective, please.
Okay. What does safeguarding look like in 10 years from now? Where should we start? Who wants to start with this one? What does it look like in 10 years from now? Savita, you're looking,
I know,
as if you're saying, I'm ready to go,
really
or don't look at me.
Well, if I just think even about myself, and I'm sure you'll all be thinking the same, if you think about 10 years back to what children are dealing with now from what you were dealing with 10 years ago, the landscape has changed so much. Social media has changed everything. And if you think about the pressures now that these young people have, safeguarding and the risks that they're exposed to can come in any shape and form, be that from their telephone, from gaming, we were only having this conversation yesterday, weren't we, about esports and things like that. And if you think about the risk that they'll be exposed to in 10 years' time, it's almost incomprehensible to think about the technology and how far it will advance and other factors in terms of what they'll be exposed to. So it's really hard to gauge, but certainly, I suppose what remains at the centre of it is a child. And the fact that we still need to keep thinking a bit more like Paul was saying there, about thinking about the support network around that child, be they parents, guardians, carers, whatever it might be, and then school and sport, obviously the part of that bubble around that child, that won't change. That will remain, you know, a support network will remain. So I suppose if we stay focused on that, as opposed to fearing what might come, we might be able to get there slowly and together, but it is a really good question. I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah, it's a very good question. We'll come to the first part of your question as well in just a moment, but John, do we have to look back in order to look forward? I mean, 10 years ago, we haven't had Paul's story.
Yeah.
So you think about how far we've come in the last 10 years.
So I think the difference between now and 10 years ago will be greater than between now and 10 years forward. I agree. I think sport's done a huge amount. No one's resting on their laurels. People recognise that that threat is always going to be there. But I think there has been a huge amount of dynamic change. But nonetheless, understanding the challenges around esports, gambling, social media. I mean, I don't do social media, so it's closed book for me. But I know that the amount of bullying on social media is not going to go down. It's only going to go up. So I think understanding and putting in place education strategies to deal with those, I think, will be particularly key, and I would be disappointed in 10 years' time if we haven't grappled with those issues better.
Can we pick up on gambling then, if we can? I wasn't planning on talking about the gambling, because we spent a good hour and 15 minutes in 2019 talking about gambling, and I mentioned it this morning. And I told a story. For those of you who were here this morning, you'll hear this again. I'm sorry. But 4 years ago, I sat here and I talked about the first time I ever saw the snooker on the telly. And then for 6 years, I presented the snooker alongside Hazelove and for BBC Sport. And I told the story about first player I ever saw was Bill Werbedick. And Bill Werbedick used to have 4 pints, have a couple of cigarettes, play a frame of snooker, sit back, have another few beers, and then David Vine would link into another match and there'd be smoke everywhere. It was sponsored by Embassy. And I said, look at that. We now go to a Crucible Theatre championship where there's no tobacco advertising, there's not a pint glass in sight, most of the snooker players now drink herbal teas, it's all changed. And then I think the panel, there was a suggestion that we'll see it change in the next few years when it comes to gambling in sport. 4 years down the line, nothing's changed. And so when my boy goes on YouTube and starts watching his football videos or playing FIFA, he is like bombarded by betting advertising. So clearly, somewhere along the line, this comes down in terms of safeguarding as well. We haven't made any progress there, have we, John? Why are you laughing?
I'll take my UK sport badge off. I'm profoundly worried by the infestation of gambling and sport in this country, and I think it is going to have profound impacts on a generation. And I think that the current legislation and the proposals are way short of the mark. And you watch any sport on TV, and whether it's on the shirts, whether it's on the sleeve, whether it's on the stands, whether it's on the programme, it's in the wretched adverts in the break, whatever. You just can't get away from it, and the harm it's doing is awful. And I don't think we'll see anything so different.
Well, on a Saturday afternoon, I hand to the Bet365 for a football update, for a goal update.
Yeah.
The home of Stoke City. And I say that, 5-6 times, depending on how many goals or incidents there's been.
Yeah.
And Tara, are you worried about, mind you, we weren't planning on going down the gambling route. However, it's a major topic and a major issue facing the sports that we dearly love.
Yeah, not my sphere of expertise, Jason, but, like John, I'll take my CIMSPA hat off for a second and just tell you I think it's toxic, it's going to ruin our sector, it's like all things where money, stupid amounts of money, affect the integrity of a sport. It's one of our best ministers for sport in quite some time, in Tracy Crouch, stood down because she wanted these gambling laws pushed a lot further than we saw in the last 2 weeks, because she understood it. She understood in 10 years' time, if this toxic thing that's infiltrating our sector, and she was a massive champion of what we're all trying to do in terms of safeguarding and harm prevention. If a minister can't be heard, then it sits firmly with somebody else a little bit higher up that tree in number 10 to do something about it. And there was no commitment from government whatsoever to support that minister in those. That toxic. The thing with toxic stuff like that is the longer you leave it to fester, even if you switch it off, the longer it takes to go away. So the sooner we tackle it, the better. I just fear that the eye-watering amounts of money floating about, I watch the snooker, I watch the F1, I watch the football. We do need to talk about Spurs, Paul. I'm a massive Spurs fan.
Oh, God. We've only got an hour.
But it is absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who's it's destroyed his life, gambling. Perfectly intelligent, family man, has lost everything down to sports gambling, and it was all through his telephone. He didn't even walk into a betting shop. So, and sports are happy with that. Not sure that's...
The first part of your question, thank you very much indeed. I mean, we've got 27 minutes and we've got lots more to talk about. The first part of your question, correct me if I'm wrong, you said to me about too hard on ourselves as well. Wave your hand if I've got that wrong. He's not waving his hand. That's good. Right, okay. Do you think there's a tendency, I'll come to you, Jayne, on this. Do you think there's a tendency for coaches to maybe be a bit too hard on themselves when it comes to the issue of safeguarding?
Too hard on themselves is an interesting word to use. I think a coach would say being too hard on themselves proves how much that they care and really want to get safeguarding right. So I suppose it's getting the balance, isn't it, around celebrating what's good. And obviously you did say about, we should celebrate there's lots of good things happening, but perhaps not use the word too hard on ourselves, but think about, but I want to be even better.
Yeah.
I want to continue to promote safeguarding. So I wouldn't use the word too hard on ourselves, but I do think it's important that they continually, we've just discussed about evolving, how young people, online gaming, esports, about, how am I keeping up with, coaching methods now? How am I continuing to improve myself? someone
Like
can
you were
be the best coach.
if you were an athlete.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Anyone else want to come in here before I move on?
Sorry, Paul. I agree that we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. So let's go back to what we looked like 10 years ago, before Paul told his story, before Jamie told his story, before Tanny undertook her report, before the whole football saga kicked off. To today, we should be patting ourselves on the back. We have moved on at a breakneck speed, and I don't believe there's a single person in this sector who doesn't see this as a priority and it's important and owns it. I think what I'd like to talk about, specifically about not beating ourselves up, is the job we've got in front of us now. This is me, Jayne and John in particular, is actually all just about joining the dots up. There is unbelievably good stuff coming out of CPSU. There is unbelievably good practice from sport resolutions, Lime Culture, NWG, Sport England, the Home Nation Sports Councils, you yourselves. It's that coordination and consistency that's key, and I just don't think it's that insurmountable. It's just about facilitation now. And we're all in a safeguarding collective where we're openly talking and sharing good practice instead of working in silo in spite of each other. In 10 years' time, I would consider this sector safeguarded, a self-regulated, safeguarded sector, where people who are rather unsavoury cannot infiltrate in the way that it's been easy to do in the last 10, 20 years, because there hasn't really been that barrier. But also promoting ourselves as fantastic practice. Going back to quickly, Jason, Karen's point about campaigns, etc. There are so many areas of good practice. The next 6 months of our work will look at that good practice and where it can be emulated and as a minimum standard passed on to every sport who may not be as well resourced as others. We are in a share and learn and listening sector now. And there is a real desire to get that right. So I'm with Paul. I don't think it's particularly difficult to make sure those practices are consistent. And just one other thing about parents. In our research back in 2017, 83% of parents that we surveyed believed us to be regulated. That's a really high number. And I don't think we need to panic about it. I think we should back ourselves. But I do think we have an obligation to meet that expectation.
Okay, thank you. Paul, did you want to come in here before?
Yeah, I was just thinking, in 10 years' time, if we're looking at ourselves, as I said earlier about the standards that each organisation or NGB has, and they want to own it themselves. I think when we look at organisations that have got the good practice that Michelle spoke about, when we're in a team sport, we hide our tactics, which is fair enough if we're playing a game against each other. When it's to do with safeguarding, the gloves should be off. And whether you're from judo, British rowing, the EFL, you come together and you go, what they've done is fantastic, and I tell you what, we're going to share it amongst each other. And that's how I'd like to see it, and not to see NGB so onerous about the rebadging their own standards and it being their own standards. They need to share it amongst, because we know that the Premier League have got all the money in the world, so they can afford to have the best systems in place. Well, they should be sharing that if they've got them. As the EFLs, again, I know I keep going on about it, but they have done fantastic work. That should be, other NGB should be coming to the EFL and looking at what they've done and talking to them about what they've done and how they've got to where they have, because that is no mean feat getting a graded excellent from Ofsted, as you guys will know, because I'm sure you've had many people in your organisation. So I'd like to see the NGBs, the organisations that are out there, sharing with each other the good practices and how they've got to them good practices. And I think that's the way that we'll protect children going forward in 10 years.
Excellent. That's how we build. Right then, thank you for your question, sir. There's a few more down here. Yes, and you've got a mic. Amazing.
Working, right, panel. Hi, Jason and the panel. Claire Briegel here from World Netball. I'll give you a really good example from FIFA, who are sharing their FIFA Guardians across international sport right now, so that you'll start to see those tools being shared across all sorts of sports with work with UNICEF. So just a great plug for my fellow international governing body, because they quite often are not spoken about too well, and they're actually really trying hard in this area. So my question is now to bring it back to the athletes and to the children that are affected by this. So when the early, I was involved with the UNICEF Safeguards in Sport, and all through that process they talked about the importance of listening to the children or the vulnerable adults, or as we know it goes into adults, any athlete can be vulnerable in a coaching situation. And I just wondered what's been found out, what's been discovered through involving, who's got best practice in involving either athlete commissions or groups of young children, you know, in terms of developing policy and actually understanding what the threats are. As we've talked about, the threats are going online, they may not be, you know, the methods of these perpetrators are, they're changing their methods, they're going up underground, they're going into the dark web. What are we learning from the children that are actually experiencing this now, as opposed to learning from your good self that was 30 years ago, because it's changing. So I don't know, this is an open question, because I think we need to be thinking about what's happening now and learning now.
Yeah, no, good question. Who wants to take that on? What are we learning now?
Do you want me to take this one? So I agree. I think we are lacking in data, particularly in a sector, and it's kind of difficult to do because people record things differently, and if there was something more standardised in how we would get that information. But we can look elsewhere, you know, the NSPCC have got Childline and things like that, so we gather information about what are themes and issues for young people. I think one of the one of the challenges that I pose to sports organisations and other sectors, when things have gone wrong and there's been independent reviews, the consistent criticism is nobody's spoken to children. They don't involve children and young people across the board. Not necessarily just about safeguarding, but about anything. And so we have to equip people to be able to talk to young people about the small things, like absolutely tiny things. Because as they start to feel heard and listened to, people respond to those, they'll start to trust them with the bigger things. And that sounds really easy, but it's hard because people are nervous. So one of the things that we're really keen to do within the Child Protection in Sport unit is roll out kind of train-in-the-trainer programs of how you can engage with young people, different ages, different ways, to try and get their feedback about what life is like for them. I'm quite old now, so growing up as a teenager in the 80s, 90s, it's nothing like what it is for kids now. So I can't assume it's the same. So we have to be having those conversations. So I think we need to get better with data on what people are telling us. And there are methods in place. We're trying to do a bit of that at the moment with Loughborough University. But I think that could definitely improve. Or give a better, more correct figure about what's going out in sport.
Do you think, though, Michelle, if I can just ask you this question as a added-on question, do you think the parents would be happy for those kids to be questioned at a panel, or if it was done confidentially? Would parents be happy to give that consent?
I think it's about how you do it, and I guess talking to young people, I really wouldn't encourage putting them like in somewhere like this and interviewing them, but you would talk to them anyway, and coaches are doing it all the time. How did you find that session? How was that? We need to get better about their experiences in life, in sport, out of sport. You know, I mentioned the Loughborough University, and out of that, 54% of the cases that came out through sport were actually happening at home, in the community, or within school. So we need to create opportunities to talk to people, for them to kind of share their stories, and not in a formal way. And it's also about equality. And if you invite panels, and I'm not opposed to youth panels or forums, but you're not going to get the voice of every young person. You will get the voice of some young people. So how do we talk to those that aren't as represented on those kind of forum type panel things?
Yeah.
And just to add to that, speaking from my role over at Sport Resolutions, I think we also need to actually give children the credit that they're due, that they're actually really empowered. If you give them the chance, they will talk. You know, I've been on panels myself, and some of the esteemed colleagues here have been sat and listened to evidence from young people who actually are very empowered to say, no, this did happen to me, and I do want to tell you about what's happened to me, and this is my voice. And at Sport Resolutions, you know, we're very well versed, and making reasonable adjustments for these young people, making sure it's a calm environment, making sure it's a suitable environment for them, so that they feel safe to be able to say what's really, really important to them. I mean, again, I go back to being a school governor. I sit on, panels with children, and like I said, they're very, very keen. Once you get them talking, sometimes they won't stop.
Yeah, and some schools have been really good at that, haven't they, in terms of their eco clubs and their representatives when it comes to the environment and that sort of stuff. So they do it anyway, don't they?
Yeah. But even from a panel setting, like sort of thinking about, actually, if not so much just about hearing their views, but if it gets to the stage of having to then give evidence or talk about what they've experienced, actually there is ways and means in which you can do it, and we've facilitated that at Sport Resolutions in a very sensitive way, and it's led to some positive outcomes and keeping people out of sport, so it can be done.
Anyone else want to come on this before we move on? John, I'm acutely aware you'll be given a microphone. Is that for Neil Diamond?
I'm not going to sit. Actually, just picking up that last point, I used to be a school governor too, and when we appointed a new head, all the candidates were interviewed by a panel of students from the school, and the views of those students were fed into the overall recruitment process, because they take a view. So I think it's really important. Really important.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. Thank you. Right, we've got a couple of questions here. We got a lot of work to do. Here we go. Right, we've got one at the front, and then we'll get your mic to you there, third row. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jayne from Savita today. So for the past 4 seasons, we've been commissioned by the EFL to deliver their safeguarding training to their CPSU clubs. We also provide supervision currently for the NGB heads of safeguarding and football clubs. So obviously, we're talking to people on a daily basis, and I suppose that the question is about recruitment, not safe recruitment, not recruitment DBS checks for volunteers, and that is one of the very many important issues. It's about recruitment of heads of safeguarding and what value decision makers put on the head of safeguarding. It's a massive role. It comes with a lot of pressures. And when I speak to, or when we in the team speak to clients, it's very clear that head of legal, head of finance, head of HR are offered really hefty financial packages, yet heads of safeguarding are not alongside and not treated as equally. And obviously, an independent person, our team support the heads of safeguarding, but time and time again, on LinkedIn, you see adverts for heads of safeguarding of NGBs. So I suppose the question is, for the panel, is how do you persuade decision makers to make sure that safeguarding is an equal family member to HR, finance, all the other corporate services that sport provide? And then the second part is, what are people going to do about it?
Yeah, okay, so head of safeguarding, right? Yeah, so equality. So who's going to take on?
I'm happy to kick off.
Please.
I mean, it's interesting. It's sort of linked to the question I was saying about in 10 years. So in 10 years' time, you probably want to see that probably happening more than 10 years in the fact that, the lead safeguarding officer, the head of safeguarding in an organisation has parity with, you say, the legal and the other, the really important roles. And actually, we are starting to see that happen. So, British Gymnastics, obviously, they've now made the statement that they've just appointed a director of welfare and safe sport that's on their senior management team. So they've made that statement in the light of everything that's happened to say they want to have a director responsible for safeguarding. So it's almost recognising for organisations to appreciate the importance of safeguarding and why it's absolutely important. It's not just somebody that's I'll be the welfare officer, I'll be the lead safeguarding officer. It's recognising it's a really, really important role in the organisation. I mean, obviously, there's probably other colleagues in the panel, because you could cascade that all the way down to welfare officers in sports clubs. How do we support them? How do we support sports clubs that are welfare officers seen as a really important role? Not that there's somebody as in, was last to put the hand up and it's like, you can be the welfare officer. How are we supporting welfare officers in clubs that it's a really, really vital role, that they're supported, well-training, well-education. So it goes from right at the top at national governing bodies to have somebody who's appointed, but all the way down to local sports clubs. So,
yeah. Okay.
I
was going to say, do you want one more on a head of safeguarding, and then I think we've got about 4 or 5 more to go.
Well, I was going to say that, so the latest iteration of the Code for Sports Governance requires there to be a board member with specific responsibility for welfare and safety, which gives board level focus for those issues, which I think is definitely another step forward in the right direction without so constraining how NGBs run the sport.
Okay, excellent question. Thank you very much. Is there somebody with a mic at the moment? Yeah, I know you've got a mic. Is there any? There we go. Thank you for your work. Amazing. Right, off you go. Hello.
My name's Francis. I'm the safeguarding from the British the Athlete Association. I think someone on the panel earlier said that in 10 years' time, the sector will be safeguarded. So as the key stakeholders in this sector, what is your tangible commitment to athletes to ensure that our sector is safeguarded?
Okay. You start here and go around, or do you want to think about it? How do you make sure that your sector is safeguarded? Who wants to start?
Do you want me to start? Because I don't, you're a very naughty person. I think there is something about we just don't have to constantly ask and check, and we can't assume it's done. I get absolutely what everyone said, we have come so far, but the world constantly changes. So the commitment has got to be that we're checking in with all our stakeholders, and we're making sure that things still work for them. And I guess one of the things I wanted to mention is that we've talked a lot about child safeguarding. The CPSU was brought in, I think, in 2001, so we've done a lot of that. In 10 years' time, I'd like us to be talking in a similar vein to adult safeguarding, and I know I've got it from alcohol trusts in the audience, and that's where we need to be. So the commitment has to be what we've done for children and who's autism. We need to constantly check in and constantly evolve. So, I'd love to be out of the job, don't get me wrong, but I think we've got a responsibility to constantly evolve and shift.
Yeah. Safeguarded, anyone else want to come in on?
I think there'll be a shift of resource from participation to administration, because recognising that this stuff has to be done, and that it would be a standing agenda on boards. That it's one of those subjects that you just, like the fourth rail bridge, you continually return to it time after time because it's that fundamental.
Yeah,
I think adding to that sort of your phrase there, moving from participation to administration, actually at Sport Resolutions, that's precisely what we do, insofar as assisting and helping support national governing bodies who are catching up effectively and don't have the level of resource that some of the larger ones do, but that's exactly what we're doing. And like you said, listening to the voice, well, that's why we have sport integrity as well, to be able to champion, actually, we know that the abuse occurs not just with children, it's across the board with adults, vulnerable adults, and also at the elite level. We know that there's an abuse of power and control and all of those aspects. So we have that opportunity there and available to elite athletes who wish to effectively whistleblow or raise those concerns. So yeah, definitely, providing that administrative support. I mean, that's effectively how we will continue.
Okay.
I would say from what you see from the report, from the Sheldon report, and we go back to reviews, and I've seen one of the recommendations was, depending what level you were at, whether it be Premiership down to the second division, depends on how you employ somebody that's head of safeguarding. Now, if you're at a second division club, then you only need somebody that works part-time. And what I've noticed is, within football, is the clubs that don't have the finances will have a head of safeguarding, which is a direct cost. And if they're struggling for money, they will give that head of safeguarding another job alongside the job that they're doing. What I didn't quite get from the review and the recommendations was why Sheldon would think that a youngster at a Premiership club has more right to be safeguarded than a youngster at a second division EFL club. I mean, where's the importance in that? So, and I think that's going back to your question probably, Jenny, is, the importance of that safeguarding individual at the club, because for me, you're as important as a child when you're at Rotherham United as you are than when you're at Manchester United. But the report didn't reflect on that for me, because it said we recommend that below the Championship that you only need somebody part-time to safeguard the children at the club. That's saying that they're not as important as those at the top. So we've still got a lot of work to do, basically.
Yeah. Tori, did you want to come in on this, or should we just zip to the next one?
No, there's plenty of hands up. I won't.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, just give me a rough idea. How many more questions have we got? We got about 6 minutes. So what we could do is a couple of questions, maybe to one or two of the panelists. We'll rattle through them. Yes, who's got a microphone? Hello.
Thank you very much. My name is Savita Cameron. I'm Head of Governance and Lead Safeguarding Officer for Swim Wales. I think we have come a long way, and I think the independent reviews that have been carried out have given us all the opportunity to look at ourselves internally and our processes and our procedures, and make changes where we see fit and appropriate. One of the recommendations was to look at a safeguarding platform where concerns can be reported. We initiated My Concern 2 years ago into our club network, and we're having a lot more knowledge of some of the concerns now that are happening in our own affiliated clubs and organisations. Secondly, we've just introduced a new system as well that's provided by the safeguarding company that's who produces My Concern. And that's a platform, for those of you who don't know, that was created by former police officers that used to work in safeguarding, so that have some knowledge. But we've now introduced My Voice, and there are on occasions, as we're all saying, people that don't want to speak up for fear of reprisal for some way or another. And My Voice is a link on our website, Report to Safeguarding Concern, that takes you straight to a form. You can do this anonymously, or you can put your details in, which we encourage people to do so that we can go back to them if there's any questions, etc. But one of the key areas for me from the reports, the independent investigations, was the values of the cultures and how important those are within the organisations that we govern, because we are national governing bodies and we're here to govern. And governance is very high on our priorities. Apart from looking at the values and cultures that we need to improve, I mean, Tara gave an example of the gas fan. I give an example of, there's two houses, and the burglars coming along the street, and there's one house with all the security lights on, car in the driveway, and as you walk past the house, the sensor light comes on, and the next house is completely black, no car in the driveway, and no signs of any life whatsoever. Which house do you think the burglars are going to burgle? Yeah, the house with no lights or anything on. So reflect that through, turn that around to your values and your cultures, and if you're talking about your policies and your procedures and you're bringing to life all the policies and the procedures you have access to in a club, and how to report to safeguarding concern, and you are engaging with your parents, and your welfare officer does have an agenda slot on your committee meetings, that is a massive preventative to, well, I think it's massive, to any perpetrator that wants to come through. We talk about register of coaches, absolutely good idea, I think, but there are coaches at the moment as well that are slipping under the radar, that are going into roles that you don't have to have a DBS check for. Can we solely rely on our clubs to maintain safe recruitment procedures? So there is a lot more to be done, I agree, but I do think that there's a lot we've learned and a lot we can learn from even going back through those recommendations of the reports and implement within our own organisations. So probably there isn't a question for me, but if anybody wants to comment, please do.
Thank you. I feel like we're fully briefed. Thank you very much indeed. In fact, I'll come to you, Tara, because you kind of missed out on the last one. The My Voice sounds with Swim Wales sounds fantastic, isn't it? The technology's there, so use it, whether you report it and you leave your name or you can do it anonymously.
Yeah, it's brilliant to hear from you, and thank you for sharing. You've hit the nail on the head, and this room is full of very smart people and a room full of leaders. So I'm not going to tell you how to suck eggs, but there is a massive difference between compliance and culture. And if we adopt a compliance culture, instead of, as Paul described, the culture has legs on it and you can see it walking around the building, that's the significant difference. And I think, again, it's not a huge shift, but if we have to be asked the question the lady asked just a minute ago about whether or not safeguarding officers are recompensed appropriately according to their credibility and their responsibility, we've still got a culture issue. So I believe 100% that everyone in this room cares about this and means to get it right. But there are some big organisations around on this stage today, and it's not all about money, by the way, but the cultural shift from ticking boxes and writing policies and procedures and systems is one thing that I think we've done very well. Sharing a good practice, owning it, living and breathing it, that's the 10-year test. In 10 years' time, the 83% of those parents who we surveyed assumed we were regulated or self-regulated will be able to see it and breathe it and hear it. Children will have a voice, etc. Coaches should always have a voice. Coaches cannot be ignored here. Coaches are not the enemy. By and large, they're just brilliant. But it's that whole ownership that's key. There is another sector that's very different to ours, but it's been through a very similar story, which is the care sector. And you know, many of you will recall the rather horrific undercover cameras that were infiltrating care homes where vulnerable people were being abused because the people employed and deployed within those care homes were not vetted, were not suitably trained or competent or known, and consequently were allowed to, you know, wreak havoc on vulnerable people. The sector itself took it upon itself to self-regulate, and that's where the Quality Care Commission came from. And government is keeping this at arm's length. Jayne, I think I'm right in saying so, John as well. But they are keen to see that we do self-regulate. They are keen to see that that culture, not compliance, is owned by the sector. We never want to be regulated to or done unto by central government. So I think, for me, we're right on the cusp of getting it right, and hearing great practice like that and being able to share it is key. But please don't let's tick boxes, because then we're underestimating the safeguarding people.
I think there were two more questions. Were there two more questions? Yeah. Oh, we'll have to be really quick. Okay. We're into added time. Final whistle's almost being blown. Where should we go first? Gentleman on the right-hand side. Hello.
Yeah, Jeremy Rogers, Western Union, Policy Integrity. My questions around, or comments around the relationship between coach development and safeguarding. I think from our point of view, I'm also a coach, so we're very good from a coach development point of view. We're looking at tactical, technical ability, safeguarding being one of the pillars to make sure that we've got safeguarding and integrity, being one of the pillars to make sure that we've got holistic coaches who understand their responsibilities in a position of trust. So just wanted people's thoughts on it. One of the things we're looking at is sometimes safeguarding is over there, but then coach development's over there. It's bringing it together so that within our coach development programs we've got safeguarding underpins everything that we do. So just want to get everyone's thoughts on that.
So alignment there. Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, no, I think echo. Absolute perfect sense, yeah.
Lovely.
No brainer.
Thank you, sir. We've had Swim Wales and the Welsh Rugby Union. It's like I feel like I'm hosting a Radio Wales phone-in back in Cardiff, which you can listen to Monday to Wednesday if you on 103.9, and ask your smart speaker to play the phone-in. The number to call is 03700 110. Ingrained in my brain. Who's next, please? There was one more we were going to squeeze in. Oh, there is. Where is it? Yes. Hi, Ali. Oh, you haven't got a microphone. We can hear you. Go on.
I'm the Director of the Sport Resolution, colleague of yours, Jayne.
Hello, Ali.
And a couple of years as chair of the Cricket Rights Club, which is where I was engaged in safeguarding. And you touched on safeguarding of young adults, not just children. And I'm keen to think that our NGBs conscious of thinking about the responsibility of keeping everybody safe under their roof, not just sort of participants, athletes, staff, employees, but sport, and when you get to international level, at national level even, it's sort of a moving surface. There are lots of people who come from outside of the sport, people that the media in particular, come from different organisations, contractors, everyone wearing an accreditation around their necks. And speak from a situation where I was going to a scenario when I come to sport in another country, where there was a situation of two external members who were all working under the accreditation, so under the auspices of the governing body, and the harassment situation evolved over a period of time. And I got involved because of my position within the media at that time. And there was no complaint procedure at that time for that governing body. Nobody knew how to deal with the situation. And I wondered, is that something that's sort of on the radar? So actually, to sort of encompass everybody, like does that accreditation mean that actually you're also under the auspices of the governing body? Because you've got vulnerable young adults, even we're seeing particularly in the media, 18-year-olds who are newly qualified out of university, they might go sit on the backpack, travel the world, think what freelance work they've got. And I always knew that if I ever had an issue, unfortunately, that I'm a sporting event, usually as part of a big organisation. So if I ever had an issue, I would have somebody to go to, whether it's BBC or PT Sport or whoever. But there's also a lot of young freelancers in the industry who are on their own and would not know who to turn to. And in that case, should an NGB have a responsibility because something could be happening under the roof of their event, if you like? Is that something which should come under this umbrella?
It's a good question, isn't it? Very good question. We're talking about safeguarding. Yeah? No matter where you are, who you are, what age you are.
So when we set up sport integrity for Olympic and Paralympic programmes, we also included provision to cover national governing bodies when they're hosting mega events in the UK to provide support in that sort of circumstance. And indeed, it's already been deployed to support an NGB in dealing with a situation in that circumstance. And of course, as part of the Code for Sports Governance, NGBs are required to have policies and processes that include employees, contractors, and other affiliates that work with them. So wouldn't say it's a perfect solution, but I think there's certainly a number of provisions in that space that NGBs can use.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to whiz because I don't want anyone to leave and say we didn't get round to ask a question. I think we've got one more. Yes, hello.
Hi, Emma Gibson from the Craft Trust. We're a Safeguarding Adults charity. There's a certain irony that I've been trying to get my voice heard. I just wanted to, this could be a question, it could be a comment. Earlier on, Aaron asked a question about where safeguarding will be in 10 years' time. The Safeguarding Adults in Sport agenda has been around for a good 15 years or so. There's people in this room that are on the Safeguarding Adults in Sport steering group when we first started talking about that. And I think there's a natural tendency, and it's kind of been shown in the type of questions and the responses as well, that we naturally drift into safeguarding children. So I kind of wanted to repose the question that Jayne asked about where we see adults, where we could see safeguarding in 10 years' time, but specifically, would anyone on the panel like to comment about adult safeguarding?
Okay, good question. Adult safeguarding, because we have spent a lot of time, haven't we, talking about youngsters and young adults.
I'd say that within UK sport, we tend to regard safeguarding as both adults at risk and children, because the majority of our athletes will be over 18. So I think most of the remarks I would say would be addressed to the adult at risk community as well. But we recognise that there is certainly work to do in that space.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think likewise, the Safeguarding Case Management Programme has been set up to accept referrals in relation to both children and adults. And myself, I used to sit my local authority a designated board for adults as well. So I bring that level of expertise over across to sport resolutions, and we're very much aware of dealing with, be they respondents, be they complainants, being very fair and balanced in the way that we treat all people that come to us for support.
You can almost look at it as this is about safeguarding people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether they're 5 or whether they're 75, this is about safeguarding everybody that takes part in sport, whether participation, official, coach, volunteer. That's the way we should look at it.
What a brilliant session. Absolutely sensational. Thank you, Jayne, Savita, John, Tara, Paul, Michelle. Please thank them.
But my God.